Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here to really tear through the source material, analyze all the nuance, and pull out those crucial insights you need. Today, we're tackling something really big, one of the most volatile issues of our time, really. And hey, if you find value in these conversations, remember you can get great deep dives like this every single day. Just visit Mind Expansion Daily. Yeah, make sure you like and subscribe there. And, if you really appreciate the analysis we do, maybe consider buying us a coffee. The link's right there in the description. So, our mission today, it's a heavy one. We're digging through global stats, historical archives, current public feeling, including some pretty pointed social media posts, all to answer what sounds like a simple question, but really isn't. Does mass immigration lead to cultural erosion, or does it actually lead to cultural enrichment? It's complex, no doubt. And we want to hear what you think. After we lay out the evidence, definitely leave a comment. Tell us if you agree or disagree with our final summary. Oh, and please let us know where you're listening from, your country or city.
It's always fascinating to see how these things play out globally, and honestly, we'd love to boost our reach worldwide. Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack this. We're definitely standing at a major cultural crossroads here. The whole immigration debate is just so emotional, isn't it? It touches the very identity of nations.
It really does. And what's fascinating, is that this isn't some abstract debate. It's happening against the backdrop of this huge demographic shift. I mean, global migration is surging. The latest UN data confirms it: over 281 million international migrants globally.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not a trickle. It's fundamentally changing populations.
And when you zoom into specific places, like the U.S., those numbers really drive it home.
They absolutely do. Pew Research found the foreign-born population in the U.S. is sitting at 14.3%. That's a big slice. And crucially, that group, they're driving something like 40% of the country's recent population growth.
40%.
Exactly. And these numbers, they really define the core tension everywhere. You've got this often urgent need for people for economic reasons, clashing right up against this really deep-seated anxiety about, keeping national identity and culture intact.
Okay, let's dive right into that anxiety then.
Yeah.
Because the source material we looked at, it's full of arguments pointing towards cultural erosion. What's the fundamental fear there?
Well, the core fear, the main argument from critics, is basically that mass immigration actively dilutes unique national traits, traditional ways of life. They call it cultural erosion. You see this articulated really sharply in the UK, even though net migration actually fell by half in 2024.
Oh, it fell.
Yeah, it did. But groups like Migration Watch UK still argue the pace of change is just overwhelming. They talk about neighborhoods transforming, new languages, new customs, before established residents really have time to adapt.
And I guess that anxiety feels more real when it translates into actual strain on infrastructure, right? It's not just philosophy.
Exactly right. The pressure is real. It's measurable. Like London's 2025 reports, they show schools getting severely overcrowded. They even saw, apparently, a 20% rise in rejection rates for foreign travelers, and that was explicitly linked to infrastructure just not coping.
Wow.
And it's not just bureaucratic strain. It hits public health, too. We saw data from Tower Hamlets in London. It highlighted mental strain, real health impacts tied directly to overcrowded housing that comes with rapid population growth.
That physical strain must fuel economic anxiety, too, among the native population. Even if immigrants often take jobs others don't want.
Yeah, the fear of displacement and cost is definitely there. It's a persistent narrative. And the perception of cost, well, that's a huge political driver, isn't it? The UK polls we saw, a startling 78% of people cited welfare burdens as a major concern linked to immigration.
78%. That's huge.
It is, and this economic fear, it often makes integration problems worse. When new communities can't integrate or maybe aren't given the resources to, you end up with these isolated pockets.
And the consequences of that isolation can be pretty severe.
They can be. The sources pointed specifically to Sweden's challenges, citing reports from 2025 that showed crime rates were about 10% higher in certain migrant-heavy areas. Now, these areas are sometimes called no-go zones, which is, a really loaded term, often sensationalized.
Right, very controversial term.
Very. But the underlying data does suggest significant integration gaps that show up as social strain. Germany faces similar issues, too. There was a big SVR study, that's the Expert Council on Integration and Migration, immigration. It noted significant integration gaps, found that 73% of native Germans cited conflicts, often around language or differing social norms.
And that tension just feels so raw when you look at public conversations. We saw it reflected so starkly on social media in those expos.
Oh, absolutely. The sentiment is intense. It's deeply fearful, often of what feels like intentional, unmanaged change. We pulled some posts reflecting this anxiety. One user just flat out said, "Mass immigration is insane, will lead to the destruction of any country."
Strong word.
Very. Another was even more direct, claiming the mass global immigration of Islam is by design to change the culture. Now, whether these posts are factually accurate or not isn't the point here. They reflect a genuine, widespread feeling that the current pace of change is maybe out of control and threatens the existing social fabric.
Okay, so that paints a pretty heavy picture of social strain, anxiety. But we have to pivot now, right? Because there's a whole other side to this, looking at the economic facts. Facts that seem to directly contradict the idea of immigration as just a burden. This is a side arguing immigration isn't just enrichment, it's actually a source of critical economic strength.
Yeah, and the economic contribution isn't just, a small positive side effect. It's really fundamental to many modern economies. Take entrepreneurship, for example. Wharton data shows immigrants are something like 80% more likely to start businesses than native-born citizens.
80% more likely. Wow.
Yeah. They tend to be risk takers, they create jobs.
And when you look at the total impact, the overall financial numbers, you're just astronomical.
Absolutely astronomical. AIC data showed immigrants add, wait for it, $2 trillion to the U.S. GDP.
$2 trillion.
Trillion, yeah. And they contribute that same 40% of overall growth we mentioned earlier. This isn't just, pocket change. This is serious fuel for global economic engines. And think about countries with aging native populations. This labor becomes absolutely vital. 78% of immigrants were actively in the workforce, filling critical labor shortages that the native population just couldn't fill on its own.
Okay, hang on. If immigrants are adding $2 trillion to the U.S. GDP and 78% are working in Germany, filling shortages, how do we square that with the 78% in the U.K. worried about welfare costs? That feels like a major disconnect.
It is a disconnect, and it often comes down to macro versus micro, or national versus local perception. That $2 trillion benefit, it's spread across the whole economy. It boosts industries, global competitiveness, often in ways people don't directly see or feel. But the perceived strain on welfare, on local services like schools and housing, like we talked about with Tower Hamlets, that's felt immediately, it's local, it's visible.
Right, that makes sense. The benefit is diffuse, the cost feels concentrated.
Exactly, although the cultural benefit can often be quite direct and localized, too.
That's where the whole melting pot idea comes in, I suppose.
Yeah.
In the U.S., we celebrate that cultural fusion, Italian food, Irish festivals. It's seen as creating a dynamic, evolving culture.
And that dynamic energy can even be quantified, often through things like tourism. Think about Toronto.
Okay.
It boasts something like over 200 distinct ethnicities. The city has these incredibly vibrant festivals, cultural events all year round. And studies show that boosts tourism revenue by over $10 billion annually.
$10 billion just from that cultural vibrancy.
Yeah, that cultural mix becomes a direct economic asset. It shows diversity can create this unique, profitable edge.
And we saw sentiment reflecting this on X too, balancing out the fear we talked about earlier. Posts arguing clearly like immigration is good for culture in America, focusing on that dynamic progress, the innovation it brings.
Right, so you have both narratives running strong.
But this kind of cultural friction, this push and pull, it's not exactly new, is it? To understand why things feel so volatile today, we probably need to look back historically.
Oh, absolutely. Looking at history is essential here, because today's fears really echo past cycles of nativism. Think about the 1840s. Around 1 million Irish immigrants arrived in U.S. cities fleeing the potato famine.
Right. A huge wave.
A massive influx. Poor Catholic. They immediately changed the urban landscape, and it sparked the Know Nothing movement, a whole political party built on anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant fervor.
The fear back then must have been intense.
Yeah.
That the Irish would, destroy American culture, steal jobs.
Precisely those fears. Yet, fast forward a few generations, that same culture deeply enriched the U.S. We celebrate St. Patrick's Day now, right? But that acceptance, that assimilation, it took decades, sometimes a century.
So a pattern emerges.
Yeah.
Initial backlash, often fears, but eventual blending seen as a benefit later on.
That seems to be the historical trend. Then you had the Great Wave, roughly 1880 to 1920. About 24 million Europeans arrived.
Fueling industrialization.
Massively. Immigrants were, what, 21% of the workforce by 1920? An undeniable economic contribution. But again, the fatigue set in. Fear of cultural change, fear of homogenization, maybe.
Yeah.
And it led to really strict immigration quotas being imposed not long after.
And then after World War II.
Similar story, different context. Labor migration, think of Turks going to Germany, for example, solved immediate labor shortages, helped rebuild economies. But it often created long-term integration challenges because, well, immigrants were frequently housed in isolated areas, which led to generational ghettos where integration just didn't fully happen.
So history seems to confirm. Economic need often comes first, then the social friction follows. And real assimilation. That takes generations.
It really underscores that it's a long-term process.
Which brings us to maybe the key point. The difference between strain and strength often seems to boil down to management, not just the numbers. And the source material gave us a pretty powerful case study for success through proactive policy. Canada.
Yeah, Canada is often held up as an example of managing this differently. They brought in their official multiculturalism policy back in 1971, and they seem to have managed the Balancing Act relatively successfully. Immigrants make up about 23% of their population now, and crucially, they're specifically noted as boosting the GDP by around 7%.
So a deliberate policy framework makes a difference.
It suggests that cultural change can be managed effectively if integration is actually prioritized from the top down.
So the real lesson seems to be that the debate shouldn't just be about if migration happens, because history shows it's pretty much inevitable.
Right, it's always happening.
But more about how it's managed. And the sources had that really powerful quote summing up the challenge for states today. Immigration without integration is colonization.
Oof, yeah. That really hits home, doesn't it? It frames it as a responsibility, a two-way street, not just letting people in, but actively working on that integration piece.
Okay, so bringing it all together. What does this mean for right now, the current 2025 landscape? We've seen the economic benefits, the cultural strains, the historical echoes amplifying anxiety. Where does public opinion actually sit today?
Well, the 2025 picture is predictably complex. In the U.S., overall concern about immigration seems to have eased slightly. And interestingly, one poll showed 71% of Republicans now actually favor pathways to citizenship.
Really? That's a shift.
It suggests maybe some of the political rigidity is softening. Meanwhile, in the UK, even with that drop in net migration we mentioned, you're still seeing local protests. So the core conflict, it's still there. That tension between enrichment and Harvard Business School framed it as broadening culture versus the fear of homogenization, which others argue breaks down society.
And given the future projections are pretty stark, like the UK population potentially increasing by 6.6 million just from migration by 2036.
Yeah, those numbers are significant.
How do countries even begin to balance that kind of influx with the need for integration?
Integration really is the absolute key variable if you want to avoid deep polarization. And countries are trying different things. Germany, for example, is looking at boosting naturalization efforts, trying to speed up civic integration. Sweden's exploring more targeted bilateral labor agreements, focusing specifically on skilled labor to fill gaps without perhaps overwhelming social services.
So targeted approaches.
Yeah, the goal isn't really cultural stasis anymore. Nobody realistically expects that. It's more about finding ways to successfully embrace diversity while also actively preserving what the existing population sees as its core values. It's a tough balancing act. So if we boil it all down, the core conclusion seems to be this. Mass immigration fundamentally reshapes culture. That's undeniable. It inherently dilutes some existing elements, yes, but it simultaneously enriches others through new ideas, dynamism, innovation. And the ultimate outcome, whether that change leads to national strength or causes acute social strain, seems to depend almost entirely on how effective the policies are, how managed it is, and how dedicated the integration efforts are over the long haul.
Which brings us right back to that final thought, building on the history we discussed. The fact that real assimilation, deep integration, often takes generations. So here's a question for you to really chew on. If that multi-generational timeline is true, what kind of generational cultural responsibility does a receiving nation have today? Not just to welcome newcomers, manage the economy, but also to actively preserve some sense of continuity, some stability for the people already living there. It's that fundamental tension, isn't it, between rapid, often beneficial change and that deep human need for cultural permanence, for roots. Something to think about. Thank you for diving deep with us today on this really complex topic. And hey, don't forget, if you found this analysis useful, check the description. There's a link there if you'd like to buy us a coffee. We really appreciate it. And remember our challenge. Tell us where you're tuning in from. We love seeing our global reach grow. And drop a comment. Do you agree or disagree with that final summary, that the outcome hinges on policy and integration? Let us know. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.